Hello, guys. Hello, guys. We are back. We are back to do the book club. It's been a little bit of a break. Henrietta was on a little retreat, silent retreat. It was wonderful. I'm sure she'll tell us about it later. And we are going to do today our book club, our Be Holy for I Am Holy book club. And we're reading The Complete Visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich, which is a really nice, hefty book of like 1,000 pages. So it'll take us a while to read it.
2,000.
2,000 pages. But these are just beautiful visions, guys. And they have all been approved by the Catholic Church in 2004, I believe it was, or 2005. Pope John II approved them all, every single one of them. So even some of them are a little out there for us to understand, but they're authentic. So
And they were checked historically. When the church approves something, they look into it for years. And this was poured over by a whole team of people that do that. And they looked at historical accuracy, things that she couldn't know. She was in a bed in the 1800s. She couldn't know these things. So they know how to do, they know when they're approving something, if it's approved, you know it's good.
Yes,
So,
yes.
And in fact, I talked to Father John. He didn't know anything about this book, but he knew it was approved. He said, you don't have to worry as long as it's approved. Because, I was like, that unicorn thing bothered me. And he said, I don't know it. He said, but as long as the church approved it. And I said, yeah, that's what we were, that's what we made sure. So, but anyway, so we are on day 33. And
the arrival in Bethlehem.
Yes.
The arrival in Bethlehem. The distance from the last public house to Bethlehem may have been 3 hours. Mary and Joseph went around by the north and approached the city on the west. A short distance outside the city, about a quarter of an hour's walk, brought them to a large building surrounded by courtyards and smaller houses. There were trees in front of it, and all sorts of people encamped in tents around it. This house was once the paternal home of Joseph, and ages before it had been the family mansion of David. It was at this period used as the custom house of the Roman taxes. Joseph still had in the city a brother who was an innkeeper. He was not his own brother, but a stepbrother. Joseph did not go near him. Joseph had 5 brothers, 3 own brothers, and 2 stepbrothers. Joseph was 45 years old. He was 30 years and I think 3 months older than Mary. He was thin, had a fair complexion, prominent cheekbones, tinged with red, a high open forehead, and a brownish beard. The little she asked was not with them there. She had run away around the south side of the city, where it was somewhat level, a kind of valley. Joseph went straight into the custom house for all newcomers, had to present themselves there and obtain a ticket for entrance at the city gate. The city had properly no gate, but the entrance lay between 2 ruined walls that looked like the remains of a gate. Although Joseph was somewhat late in presenting himself for assessment, he was well received. Mary remained in a small house in the courtyard among the women, who were very attentive to her and offered her something to eat. These women cooked for the soldiers. The later were Romans, as I could tell by the straps hanging around their hips. The weather was lovely, not at all cold, the sun lightening up the mountain between Jerusalem and Bethania. One can see it very well from here. Joseph went up to a large room in an upper story where he was interrogated who he was, etc. And his questioners examined long rolls of writing, numbers of which were hanging on the walls. They unrolled them and read to him his ancestry, also that of Mary. Joseph knew not before that through Joachim. Mary had descended in a straight line from David. The official asked him, "Where is thy wife?" For 7 years, the inhabitants of this part of the country were not regularly assessed, owing to various political troubles. I saw the number 5 and 2, and that certainly makes 7. The tax collecting had already been going on for many months, but 2 payments were still to be made. The people had to remain almost 3 months. They had indeed paid something here and there during those 7 years, but there had been no regular collection of taxes. Joseph did not pay anything on that first day, but his circumstances were inquired into. He told the officials that he possessed no real estate, that he lived by his trade and the assistance of his wife's parents. Mary also was summoned to appear before the clerk, but not upstairs. She was interrogated in a passage on the first floor, and nothing was read to her. There were numbers of clerks and functionaries in the house, scattered throughout the different rooms, and a great many Romans and soldiers were to be met in the upper stories. There were also Pharisees and Sadducees, priests and elders, and all sorts of clerks and officials of both Jewish and Roman extraction. There was no such payment of taxes going on in Jerusalem, but in many other places, in Magdalene, on the Sea of Galilee, for instance, taxes were being received. The Galileans had to pay there, and the people from Sidon too, partly on account of their commercial intercourse. I think only those that had no establishment, that possessed no estates, had to report on their birthplace. No receipts for the next 3 months were to be divided into 3 parts. The Emperor Augustus, Herod, and another king who dwelt in the neighborhood of Egypt had a share in them. The king near Egypt, having gained some advantage in war, had a claim upon a certain district far up the country. Consequently, they had to give him something. The second payment had been referenced to the building of the temple. It was something like the payment of money advanced. The third was for the poor and for widows who had received nothing for a long time, but it all went as such things do in our own day, little to the right man. Good reasons were easily found for its remaining in the hands of the great. Incessant riding and moving to and fro were kept up. Joseph then went with Mary straight to Bethlehem. On those outskirts, the houses stood scattered, and into the heart of the city. At the different streets they met, he left Mary and the ass standing while he went up and down in search of an inn. Mary often had to wait long before Joseph's anxious and troubled return. Nowhere did he find room. Everywhere was he sent away. And now it began to grow dark. Joseph at last proposed going to the other side of the city where they would surely find lodgings. They proceeded down a street which was more of a country road than a regular street, for the houses stood scattered along the hills, and at the end of it reached a low level space or field. Here stood a very beautiful tree with a smooth trunk, its branches spreading out like a roof. Joseph led Mary and the beast under it, and there left them to go again in quest of an inn. He went from house to house, his friends of whom he had spoken to Mary, unwillingly to recognize him. Once during his quest, he returned to Mary, who was waiting under the tree. He wept, and she consoled him. He started afresh on his search, but whenever he brought forward the approaching delivery of his wife as a pressing reason for receiving hospitality, he was dismissed still more quickly. And
Meantime, it had grown dark. Mary was standing under the tree, her ungirdled robe falling around her in full folds, her head covered with a white veil. The ass was nearby, its head turned toward a tree, at the foot of which Joseph had made a seat for Mary with the baggage. Crowds were hurrying to and fro in Bethlehem, and many of the passers-by gazed curiously at Mary, as one naturally does seeing a person standing a long time in the dark. I think also that some of them addressed her and asked her who she was. Ah, they little dreamed that the Savior was so near. Mary was so patient, so tranquil, so full of hope. Ah, she had indeed longed to wait. At last she sat down, her hands crossed on her breast, her head lowered. After a long time, Joseph returned in great dejection. I saw that he was shedding tears, and because he had failed again to find an inn, he hesitated to approach. But suddenly he bethought him of a cave outside Bethlehem, used as a storing place by the shepherds when they brought their cattle to the city. Joseph had withdrawn thither to conceal himself from his brothers and to pray. It was very likely to be deserted at that season, or if shepherds did come, it would be easy to make friends with them. He and Mary might find shelter there for a while, and after a little rest, he would go out again on his search. And now they went around to the left as if through the ruined walls, tombs, and ramparts of a country town. They mounted a rampart or hill, and then the road began again to descend. At last they reached a house before which stood trees, firs, pines, or cedars, and trees with small leaves like the box tree. In this hill was a cave for the vault spoken of by Joseph. There were no houses around. On one side of the cave was built up with rough masonry, through which the open entrance of the shepherds led down into a valley. Joseph opened the light wicker door, and as they entered, the she-ass ran to meet them. She had left them near Joseph's paternal house and had run around the city to this cave. She frolicked around and leaped gaily about them, so that Mary said, "Behold, it is surely God's will that we should be here." But Joseph was worried and in secret a little ashamed, because he had so often alluded to the good reception they would meet in Bethlehem. There was a projection above the door under which he stood the ass and proceeded to arrange a seat for Mary. It was quite dark, about 8 o'clock, when they reached this place. Joseph struck a light and went into the cave. The entrance was very narrow. The walls were stuffed with all kinds of coarse straw, like rushes, over which hung brown mats. Back in the vault part were some air holes in the roof, but here also everything was in disorder. Joseph cleared it out and prepared as much space in the back part as would afford room for a couch and seat for Mary, who had seated herself on a rug with her bundle for a support. The ass was then brought in, and Joseph fastened a lamp on the wall while Mary was eating. He went out to the field in the direction of the milk cave and led a leathern bottle in the rivulet that it might fill. He went also to the city, where he procured some little dishes, a bundle of other things, and I think some fruit. It was indeed the Sabbath, but on account of the numerous strangers in the city and their need of various necessities, provisions and utensils were exposed for sale on tables placed on the street corners. The price was paid down on the spot. I think servants or pagan slaves guarded the table, but I cannot remember for certain. When Joseph returned, he brought with him a small bundle of slender sticks, beautifully bound up with reeds, and a box with a handle, which were glowing coals. These poured out at the entrance of the cave to make a fire. He next brought the water bottle, which had filled at the rivulet, and prepared some food. It consisted of a stew made of yellow corn, some kind of large plant that contained a great many seeds, and a little bread. After they had eaten, Mary had lain down to rest upon her rush couch, over which was spread a cover. Joseph began to prepare his own resting place at the entrance of the cave. When this was done, he went again into the city. Previously to setting out, he had stopped up all the openings of the cave in order to keep out the air. Then, for the first time, I saw the Blessed Virgin on her knees in prayer, of which she lay down upon the carpet on her side, her head resting on her arm, her bundle serving for a pillow. This cave lay at the extremity of the mountain ridge of Bethlehem. The clump of beautiful trees stood in front of the entrance, and thence could be descried some of the towers and roofs of the city. Over the entrance, which was closed by a door made of wicker work, was a shed. From the door, a moderately wide passage led into the cave, an irregularly formed vault, half round, half triangular. On one side of the passage was a recess, rather lower than the general surface, and this Joseph had enclosed by curtains for his own sleeping place. The rest of the passage from the recess to the entrance he cut off by hangings, and there had a kind of storeroom. The passage was not so lofty as the cave itself, which was vaulted by nature. The inner walls of the cave, where they were formed entirely by nature, though not perfectly even, yet were pleasing and clean, indeed, to my eye. There was something about them quite charming. They pleased me more than did those parts upon which some attempts had been made at masonry, for these latter were coarse and rough. The foundation of the right side of the entrance appeared for some distance to have been hewn out of rock. Only the upper part seemed to have been made by the hand of a man. There were also some holes in the passage. In the middle of the vaulted roof was an opening, and I think 3 others cut obliquely halfway up the same. These oblique openings presented a smoother appearance than the topmost one. They looked like the handiwork of man. The floor of the cave was deeper than that of the entrance, and was on 3 sides surrounded by a stone seat, somewhat raised, broad in some places, in others narrow. At one of the broad parts, the ass took its stand. It had no trough, but a long leathern bag was placed before it or hung in the corner. Behind was a small side cave, just large enough to allow the animal to stand upright. There fodder was stored. A gutter ran along this corner, and I saw Joseph cleaning the cave out every day. Where Mary reposed before the birth of the child, and where I held her elevated above the ground at the moment of her delivery, there was a similar seat of stone. The spot in which the crib stood was a deep recess or side vault. Near it was a second entrance into the cave, which was in the rid of a hill that ran toward the city. In the rear, the hill sank into a very charming valley planted with rows of trees. This valley led to the suckling cave of Abraham, situated in a projection of the opposite hill. The valley may have been 1/8 of an hour in width, and through it flowed that little rivulet which Joseph had procured the water. Besides the real crib cave, there was in the same hill, but lying somewhat deeper, 2 other caves in which the Blessed Virgin often remained hidden. When in after years St. Paula laid the first foundation of her covenant at Bethlehem, I saw a small, lightly built chapel erected in the valley and on the east side of the cave. It was so constructed as to be contiguous to the rear of the crib cave and directly back of the spot upon which Jesus was born. This little chapel of wood and wicker walls was hung inside with tapestry. 4 rows of cells opened into it, which were built as lightly as shepherds' cots generally are in Palestine. In every row were separate cells, each surrounded by its own little garden and all connected by covered passages leading to the chapel. Here Paula and her daughter gathered around them, their first companions. In the chapel and free from the wall stood an altar with its little tabernacle. Behind it hung a red and white silk curtain which concealed the facsimile of the crib cave that St. Paula had caused to be made. It was separated from the real cave, from the exact spot upon which Jesus was born, only by the rocky wall. This crib was made of white stone and was a faithful imitation of that of Jesus. The manger was also represented, and even the hay hanging through its sides. The infant in it was likewise of white stone and closely swathed in a blue veil. The figure was hollow and not very heavy. I saw St. Paula often taking it up into her arms while she prayed. Upon the wall over this crib hung a banner upon which was represented the ass with its head turned toward the crib. It was embroidered in colors and the hair made of thread. So naturally that had looked like real hair. Above the crib was a hole in which a star was fastened. I saw the child Jesus often appeared here to St. Paula and her daughter. In front of the curtain and right and left the altar were hanging lamps. So, okay, so it kind of ends abruptly there, but you know, you're just describing the cave that they went into. But when you go back to the beginning here, they're just starting out on this. And I thought it was interesting how she described St. Joseph's looks.
Yeah, that's what shocked me. His age, what was it? 5 and 4, so it's like 54.
Yeah, what was that? But you know, it proves
That's not too old though. That's not 54 is not that old.
I don't think he was 54. I think that he was young because he was still dependent on, you know how young people are more dependent on their parents when they're younger, and we don't know what happened, you know.
Well,
What?
I don't know. Well, I don't know, because if you really think about it, Moses and Aaron and all those people, man, they were old when they were doing everything they were doing. I think God gave them the endurance to do what they needed to do. You know, it was all given to
Yeah,
them
but
by
I
God.
don't believe Joseph was old. I don't
I
believe
don't think he was that old, but he could have been 50. He could have. I don't know.
I don't think so. I think he was in his 30s. But you know, late 20s, early 30s. It was a different time back then. So I just thought it was interesting. We start off with the house that we had read about, Joseph's paternal home, after his parents died. And he apparently had strife between him and his brothers because he was much quieter, more contemplative person.
Yeah, remember that the brothers would pick on him all the time.
Yeah, and he was the introverted one. And so it was interesting. And then to hear about so Joseph still had in the city a brother who was an innkeeper. He was not his own brother, but a stepbrother. Joseph did not go near him. So it describes about the brothers and then the thing. And I don't know. I just, you know, so here it says he was 30 and I think 3 months older than Mary. So here it says he's 30 and 3 months older than Mary. So, you know, you saw this, right? Look, Jeanette.
Yeah, I did. I saw that.
Okay, so I
Yeah.
think he was 30 and Mary, it says, was 3 months older. So, you know, I don't know. He was thin and had a fair complexion with and his cheekbones were a little rosy. I thought that was cute. And he had a high open forehead and a brownish beard. That was just interesting to read, you know.
Yeah, and then I also contemplated a little bit about when they talked about him crying twice, because I mean, that's something that you don't hear about, but could you imagine somebody in his position having to find somewhere for his wife and not finding it, the anxiety and disappointment and just needing to keep going and then Mary comforting him? That's just, it was very good. Yeah.
Yeah, and he still depended on his wife's parents, you know.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
then it says, then I thought it was interesting to hear about the ruined walls and the remains of a gate and that they couldn't go through. Like, that was just weird. And then to hear about the women cooking for the soldiers, because, you know, at certain times, soldiers could come in and commandeer homes. They're not allowed to do that today because we have a law against it.
Oh,
But
yeah.
but they did do that early, you know, early on. We did have that. Like the South and the North, when we had that, you know, there was a lot of talk about them coming in and commandeering homes. We don't allow that anymore. But soldiers could come in and tell you, cook for me and this and that. But it sounded like these were women that were, you know, trying to help, you know. So I don't know. I always saw it as a negative, and now I'm not so sure. So I thought that was interesting. And then Joseph went up to a large room in an upper story where he was interrogated. And I'm thinking, so this is just to come and pay his taxes. And they are recording. I mean, could you imagine if we had that stuff now to see something like that? You know,
Yeah,
like,
I have to tell everybody your business.
yeah. But I'm just saying, no, I'm saying, could you imagine if we still had Joseph's records, like, you know what I mean? Like the Bible is what we have, which is great. But you know, documents last for hundreds of years. Could you imagine something 2,000 years old that we'd be looking at that was Joseph's? Like,
Yeah, that would be
I don't
really
know. It just
cool.
was interesting. Yeah. So yeah, so they're talking about the ancestry and all that, and they were telling him his ancestry. So I don't know. Then they're asking him where his wife is. And I didn't get this, that they had to stay there almost 3 months, you know. I don't know. I didn't get all that, but he didn't have real estate, so his taxes couldn't be as high. He was living on the assistance of his parents, and then Mary had to appear. It's like a court thing. So, you
Yeah.
know, when we think about our government things that we have to do, you know, so, and then Mary was interrogated in a passage on the first floor and nothing was read to her. So I don't know why. I guess it doesn't mean as much when it's a woman's ancestry as compared to men. So, and then the Pharisees and Sadducees and the priests and the elders, and, you know, it just was interesting how they were saying, you know, that because it sounded like some kind of war or whatever that had stopped some government. Yeah, it was some kind of war. They had stopped some government collection and all because of safety, I guess, because they were busy with the men fighting. So and then they were paying for the poor and for the widows. So there was like we have Social Security tax. It's like they had the tax was to help their elderly, which, we always thought they didn't do that back then. We thought, we're the ones that started Social Security. The Democrats always take control.
I'm sure they had to do something. I mean,
Yeah, they took care of the elderly.
yeah.
So I just thought it was interesting. I just hearing it is just it's just so interesting, if it's true.
Yes.
So here they are looking, and 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 she's standing on that corner in the dark, and people are going by her, and that was interesting to hear about, and then him being so upset he didn't know what to do, and it just was, and then they end up at the cave, and what does Mary do?
Yeah, where are the animals and
will.
stuff? I wonder where the animals came from. Were the animals in the actual Bible? Because
I don't know, but I found it interesting in the reading here that, remember, they said that they were the she ass, and if you ever study story like mythology and that kind of stuff, there's always like the horse means the ego and things like that. There's like symbolism to it. So here's this wild she ass, and they said in the beginning that she would lead them. And where does she lead them? She leads them to where they're meant. And who sees that supernatural connection? Mary. He says, "Behold, it is surely God's will." She was always focused on God's will. And she knew they were supposed to be there because the she-ass went ahead of them, looking, was led there, she believes, by the Holy Spirit, and was sitting in there waiting. And here they come, and she's like, yay, they're here. Like when the dog's waiting for you at home. I could just see she was all excited because they were there, So, and here, but Joseph was worried and in secret a little ashamed, because he was telling her, "Oh, when I heard him saying, 'Oh, we're going to get such a great reception in Bethlehem,' I'm thinking, no, you're not."
Yeah.
But I didn't want to say, because we were reading at the time, and I forgot to mention it when we did our reading. But I was thinking that, so it's funny that they bring it up here again. Yeah, so that was interesting, and so then Joseph went, and he was, arranging things for her and clearing it out and cleaning it, putting everything together for her.
Yeah, and he and it said he made like a couch area and everything.
Yeah.
That's really nice. Yeah.
It's sweet, right? And it says, while Mary was eating, he fastened the lamp on the wall and a direction to the milk cave. So I'm thinking, well, where is this trough that Jesus was put into? They're saying there was no trough for the little she-ass. So like, where did they end up with that trough? And remember when we went to Treasures of the church, there was a crib that was supposedly remnants of a crib, but that was from when he was a little older, I think. So it was wooden, from what we could see. So I just thought it was interesting. They were getting the food, and and Mary lays down to take a little nap, and after he prepared her little place for her, and then she sees, for the first time, she sees the Blessed Mary Virgin on her knees in prayer, after which she laid down upon the carpet on her side, like Mary lying down. We've never seen that, So imagining her in her beauty and all that, So then they go into the mountain ridge of Bethlehem and the beautiful trees, and just, just trying to imagine this. She even says, even though it was, the inner walls of the cave were they formed entirely by nature, though not perfectly even, yet were pleasing and clean indeed to my eye. There was something about them quite charming. So even with that hardship, Catherine Emmerich looks into the vision and sees the sees the charm of it. I don't know how Mary and Joseph felt, but she sees that. So I thought that was interesting. And then the animal goes in a shorter area, it says. So, and then they talk a little bit about Mary being reposed before the birth of the child, where I beheld her elevated above the ground at the moment of her delivery. So what, she had a levitation, she's saying, when she gave birth, which, they say that Mary, Jesus, like light through glass, she did not lose her virginity. She gave birth painlessly and just came through like a light through through a frosted window.
Yeah, her birth pains came at the cross, her journey to Calvary.
Right. And so what was interesting is, if she's saying that she levitated, that means when Jesus was going through the birth canal, he's going through like light through frosted glass. That's probably what would have levitated him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Would have levitated her, I mean. Would have levitated her, because Jesus is fully divine and fully human. And he passes through the birth canal, like Thomas Aquinas talks about, light through the glass, no pain. So when we see the near death experiences, they all say they go up through the hospital roof, and one they proved there was a red sneaker on the top. I'll try to find it and put it in the link. They proved this woman had a surgery. She went up and she said, there's a red sneaker on the roof. And they went up and they looked and found the
Oh my gosh, really? That's cool.
Yes. So these near-death experiences,
Wow.
when I did the Taylor Marshall study about Christ's body, how after he died physically, his body, then he was in, he could go through the walls, and now I'm trying to remember the properties. I'll look for it. The properties of the body are different, and I can't remember it now, but I will put it in the notes here. So on the links below, you'll see the links. I'll put it in. So, that's just so interesting, right? That here her body levitated when his body passed through. So that part was like profound, like, wow.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah. So and then she often, this crib cave, she remained hidden. So I thought that was interesting. I imagined her out in the fields and walking a little bit, but she was laid in there, and then the part about St. Paula laid the first foundation of the convent at Bethlehem. We already learned a little bit about that, remember?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'll put the link in there about that too. So yeah, that was all, this crib cave and all that was all like interesting, because if you go over to the Holy Land, you can see where Jesus was actually born. They have the church over it. So, I guess originally they built Paula's convent over it. Now it's the church or whatever. But
it was a cave.
It was a cave, yeah. And
because they didn't have a lot of wood structures back then. Everything was in caves. Everything
right,
was
and they
stone.
built the church over that. We have exactly where Jesus was born. You can actually see that in the Holy Land. So, and they say the crib was made of white stone and was a faithful imitation of Jesus. White is the color of purity. So it was a white stone crib that he was laid into. So, and then when it says here, the infant in it was likewise of white stone and closely swathed in a blue veil, Mary's blue. The figure was hollow. So they're talking about an imitation, a faithful imitation of Jesus. So, I don't know. Paul, this is in Paula, when Paula put the church on top. But was it really a white stone? But they were putting, Paula built the convent on top, and then to imitate Jesus, she puts this white stone crib, like a trough crib, I guess, and then the blue veil of Mary's blue, because it was centuries later that Paula's doing all this, So I thought that was interesting. She not
Who
only
was Paula again?
she's that nun that has a convent there. Remember we read about it?
I don't remember that. I'll
Well,
have to reread
I'll
that.
put it all in, yeah, because I don't have all the memory of it either, but I remember St. Paula was the one that built the convent over it. So I'll put the story in the links. So, but I just think it's interesting that that she puts up a crib, and or rather, Catherine Emmerich is seeing Mary, and then she's going ahead hundreds of years, and she's seeing St. Paula building over top of where Jesus was born. So I thought that was interesting. So you notice how she always brings it back to like she brings the story, each end of each chapter, she takes the story like ahead. And I don't know, I thought it was interesting. It had embroidered in colors hair made of thread so natural it looked like real head. Above the crib was a hole in which a star was fastened. And how did they find Jesus? They followed the star. So it reminds you of like a mobile above a baby's bed. And they have a star fastened because that's how they found Jesus. So I just think it's interesting, an embroidered star. Like I want to see now an embroidered star above every bed, babies.
And I'm here
you're
sewing
embroidering.
my stars on my my jacket.
That it was starting to come off. She ironed it on and they were starting to come off.
Yeah,
she
so
said.
I'm just reinforcing them with my
Yeah.
hand stitching.
So look, then she sees the child Jesus often appeared here to St. Paula and her daughter. So St. Paula was having apparitions of Jesus, and her daughter was too.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and then it ends abruptly in front of the curtain, and the right and left of the altar were hanging lamps, and boom, it's the end of that. So that was interesting. It was a very interesting chapter. And now the birth of the child Jesus is next, guys.
Oh, I thought this was part of it because he
It's
was
the beginning. It's them finding the place. So tomorrow we'll read the birth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sounds
So
good.
I can't, by the way, I can't do anything Thursday because I have a doctor's appointment. They're talking about this Thursday. They can't be talking about this for Thursday. We'd have to order the books. Anyway, sorry.
No, not Thursday, Tuesday.
Oh, Tuesday.
Because
Okay.
we're keeping the same day we had, Tuesday.
Yeah, okay.
What was I gonna say? Yeah, tomorrow morning I'll talk to you in a minute about.
Okay. All right. So you
So
got
guys,
tomorrow.
Yeah, what do we have tomorrow? Birth of Jesus.
Birth of
Okay.
Jesus. Anything else you wanted to add about anything?
No, I'm still pondering on a lot of stuff. The Joseph stuff is making me ponder now.
Yeah, you'll be thinking of it all day today. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, guys. We will see you tomorrow to continue our book club. This is
Have
fun.
a very blessed day.
This is fun, right?
Yeah, I think
Our
so.
imagination, it keeps us thinking.
Keeps us
All right.
pondering.
Yeah.
Bye.
Love you guys. Bye.